Okay, so what if I told you that the history you learned in school was a lie? I'm not talking about a tiny mistake here and there. I'm talking about a complete fabrication, something designed from the ground up to shape how you see the world. Well, that is the absolutely shocking claim at the heart of one historian's deep dive into Pakistan's school books, an investigation he calls the murder of history.
And this quote right here, it just perfectly captures that chilling moment of realization for him. It's like he knew the official story, the textbook version, backwards and forwards. But what he discovered was that this official narrative was so completely detached from reality that it made him question everything, literally everything he thought he knew about his own country.
So the big question is, what did he actually find that was so disturbing? I mean, what could possibly be so wrong in a school book that it would provoke a reaction like that? Well, let's retrace his steps. We're going to examine the evidence he laid out, piece by piece.
All right, so our story really kicks off when the historian decides to publish his findings. He writes this big expose in a major national newspaper, laying out what he called a plethora of mistakes. And he's expecting, a huge reaction, a national debate.
But here's the crazy part. That firestorm, it never happened. Instead, his article was met with total, deafening silence. Nothing. No angry editorials, no counter-arguments, not even a single letter to the editor. It was like he just shouted into a void. And for him, that silence was way more disturbing than any backlash could have been. It begged the question, why wasn't anyone talking about this?
Okay, now this is where the investigation gets really, really interesting. Let's dig into the actual evidence. The author started to just catalog all the errors he found. And we're not talking about small typos or a misplaced comma. We're talking about fundamental rewrites of the country's most important historical moments.
Let's start with a big one, the Lahore Resolution. I mean, this is a cornerstone document for Pakistan's creation. The textbook story says it was passed on March 23rd, and it demanded a separate homeland, singular. But the author points to the historical record, which shows it was actually passed a day later, on the 24th. And here's the kicker, it called for independent states, plural. Now you might think, okay, a day's difference, a single letter, what's the big deal? But according to him, that one change has massive implications for understanding the country's origins.
And here's another huge one. Textbooks call the 1857 uprising a national war of independence. It sounds epic, right? Like the whole subcontinent rose up? But the author argues that's a massive overstatement. His research suggests it was mostly a military mutiny, and it was really confined to just a few regions. In fact, many other parts of the subcontinent actually sided with the British, a totally different picture.
And it's not just about historical events, it's about culture too. Get this, one textbook makes the absolutely wild claim that Urdu is leaving English and French behind in popularity and importance on the world stage. The author just points to the census data, which shows that Urdu is the mother tongue for less than 8% of Pakistanis. So he argues this isn't just a silly, factually wrong statement. No, it's a political act. It's a way to elevate one language, one culture, by basically erasing the identities of millions of people who speak Punjabi, Sindhi, Pashtun, and Balochi.
So, as you can see, the author's point is that this goes way beyond just a few honest mistakes. He's arguing that this is a deliberate, systematic reshaping of history. It's about creating very specific heroes, cementing certain myths, and just completely erasing entire chapters from the national story.
And this is where it gets really political. The author points out how the textbook's portrayal of military rulers just changes depending on who's in charge. Take Ayub Khan. While he was in power, the books called him a celebrated revolutionary. The moment he's out, that praise suddenly turns into criticism. Same thing with General Zia-ul-Haq. His military coup isn't framed as, a coup. It's presented as a noble act by a pious savior to stop a civil war. The author's argument is that history is literally being rewritten in real time to flatter whoever holds power.
Okay, so twisting the facts is one thing, but what about the stories that aren't twisted, but are simply never told? According to the author, that's an even more powerful tool. What happens when huge, important parts of a nation's history are just gone? Well, he gives this really stark example, the almost total erasure of Bengali history from the narrative. He lists all these foundational figures, people like Haji Shariatullah, Dudu Mian. These guys led massive social movements. But in the curriculum, they're basically ghosts. They're just not there. And by leaving them out, he claims the textbooks create this false impression that all the important stuff, all the real history, happens somewhere else.
So this brings us to the really big question.
what's the end game here? What are the real-world consequences of all this? According to the author, the cost is huge. It's not just about students getting a few facts wrong on a test. It's about shaping an entire national identity that's built on, well, deep and pretty dangerous fractures.
Let's take a look at the 1971 crisis, the war that led to the creation of Bangladesh. The official story you'll find in the textbooks is super simple, very black and white. It was all a foreign conspiracy. India, helped by a few traitors, broke the country in two. That's it. Case closed.
But the author says that simple story completely ignores decades of conflict simmering under the surface. He lays out this whole chain of events, these deep-rooted problems, forcing Urdu on a Bengali-speaking majority, huge economic inequality where money from the East was spent in the West, shutting Bengalis out of real political power, and just this general cultural arrogance from West Pakistani officials. In his view, the breakup of the country wasn't some sudden conspiracy. It was the tragic and frankly predictable end result of ignoring these problems for years and years.
And this right here really gets to the core of the author's whole argument. He says that by erasing the history and contributions of entire regions, the textbooks create this really damaging cultural hierarchy. It creates a system where some groups are presented as the true founders, the real architects of the nation, while everyone else is just pushed to the sidelines.
And here's the ultimate kind of unbelievable result of all this, he says. The narrative ends up suggesting that the people from the regions that actually make up Pakistan today, Punjab, Sindh, the Pashtun areas, Balochistan, that they made basically no contribution to their own cultural or political awakening. It's like their stories, their leaders, their own movements just get completely swallowed up by one single state-approved story.
Which, of course, leads to the final, most critical question of all. If this version of history is so skewed and so damaging, why teach it? Who actually benefits from what the author calls this murder of history?
Well, his conclusion is pretty stark. This isn't an accident. He says it's a tool used by the state. It serves those in power by justifying military coups as some kind of necessity. It helps promote one single approved ideology that just papers over all the rich regional differences. And it creates a simple, easy-to-digest story of heroes and villains, which is a heck of a lot easier to control than the messy, complicated truth.
And all of this really leaves us with a question that goes way beyond just one country's curriculum, doesn't it? It makes you think, what official story did your textbooks teach you? And what parts of our own histories might have been reshaped, simplified, or just plain forgotten?